Hi everyone, welcome to the LinkedIn Live. We're going live here today. My name is Louis Zezerin. I'm going to introduce my guest, Janis, in just a moment. I want to greet you. Thank you for showing up today. Appreciate you taking your time out of your day. Now, full disclosure, this is not actually live, okay? It's pre-recorded. We're recording before at a better time, but it's good for you. Let me tell you why it's good for you. Number one, it's a better conversation when we're in person. Who wants the Zoom, the Teams? It's not good. We would much rather have this high quality conversation in person. And number two, while it's not live, I get a chance to be in the chat. Janis might be in the chat as well. So you want to ask the questions as this is going? I'll be there. I'm actually present in two places. So please ask your questions in the chat. I'm going to try and get to them in the moment. If we can't get to them, if Janis has to leave, then I'll make sure he gets them later. We'll make sure you get addressed. Don't worry about nothing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce my guest for today, Janis Vanags. How are you, my friend?
Hello, Tere. Since we are in Tallinn, I'm happy. I just flew in, and I'm very happy to be here. Actually, it's a beautiful day outside, and happy to see you again. Since we met in the Cybers conference, talking about the big emergencies in that area. So very recently.
That's right. So Janis and I met a few weeks ago at actually now it's called technically the Never Hack conference. They got it bought out. It's a branding change. And Janis and I had a great on-stage discussion. Janis gave a talk on crisis management, dealing with crisis, dealing with the unknown unknowns in the organization. Janis has some amazing experiences at the highest levels of management through some of the most difficult crises personally and professionally that organizations and teams can go through. He's got experience of that. He teaches this at EBS. He lectures on this around the world, how to make teams resilient, how to build crisis management in, how to deal with something when you don't even know it's coming. So Janis, really happy to talk to you about it. Did I give you a good...
Oh, thank you. You're very
right?
kind. That's very kind. Thank you.
So Janis, a little bit about your background. Latvian. Okay, we got it. We're here in Estonia, but we can do it. Very good. Yeah. Now, these days you lecture in crisis management, but as I understood back in the day, you started in marketing and communications and sort of had this education evolution. How does that happen? How do you evolve from marketing communication, quite a high and long positions and good positions, to where you're at right now?
Well, actually, to go all the way back, I wanted to be a carpenter. But of course, I failed in the drawings test. And so basically, there was nowhere else to go for me. So except the university. So I actually ended up graduating university in languages, and then all of a sudden, moved into marketing and communications, and spent there quite a bit of time, and. Basically, throughout my career, actually, the only constant thing in my career was change every 5 years or so. So basically, moving from one industry to another, and actually, the crisis management angle started in aviation. So I was actually doing a lot of very critical work when my country's airline was actually through several existential crises. So not one, few of them.
airBaltic.
airBaltic, yes, and basically together with the team, we were in the management team together with my government and the prime minister, and we were actually doing quite a bit of work to take it out of the problems, take it out of the dire straits, and move to the next level. So it was quite an experience. And then while being there, actually, my country experienced the worst civilian tragedy, non-war tragedy, when one of the supermarkets collapsed in Solitude, so one of the regions in
the Maxima.
Maxima,
yes, sir.
And basically, that company, which is a big company, it's a €1 billion turnover company, needed an entire rework of how it functions. It needed a culture change, procedural change. So was very happy to do that. Again, part of the team, with my team, I did the emergency management part, safety and quality part, culture change part. And right when we finished that job, you know what happened? The best things that can happen for a person of my type. COVID hit the world, Right when we had our beautiful new shiny system completed, all the manuals still smelling from from the printer, smelling print. Then came COVID. I mean, we could test and try, and it was wonderful. I mean, not only from the crisis management perspective, but also from the business perspective. So because we were prepared, we were printing money, basically making buckets of money as
during
a business.
The crisis,
during the crisis, just because the preparations were right.
You were ready to go.
So, I mean, it still gives me goosebumps. Yes. So then, I mean, because of that good start, actually, I got headhunted into healthcare industry, which also needed a rework of how they manage different crises and issues. So, and basically, how do they pursue change management? So maybe long story, but I mean, still, it's a little bit of a, for me, it's a little bit of a religious angle. Like if you can manage a crisis, then you are okay with change management, and then you are okay with change, which is actually the buzzword for the 21st century. So change is what we have to experience on a daily basis.
Now, to clarify a few points along the way, you joined Maxima after that incident, after the terrible accident happened.
After the accident, and they invited me in the board member position, basically to give me all the tools to make sure that change is not like a cosmetic change, but it's really an in-depth, fundamental change. So I had all the tools, I had all the basically all the authority to change it, and probably the team, the CEO who was there, I think still one of the the best CEOs around, and my colleagues in the board. I mean, probably the best board members around who could really who could literally get their sleeves up and get stuff done.
Interesting. I mean, I would imagine it'd be impossible to influence that sort of change without being at the highest levels, without being a C-suite in the organization, right?
Yes,
I mean, otherwise they're clearly not taking it seriously, and let's put someone an equal in there to enable that change. So it was you were in airBaltic at this head of communications role.
Yes.
And then, so you're going through multiple crises, multiple existential, company questioning, almost company-ending crises.
Let's call it as it is, company-ending crisis.
Company-ending crisis.
Yes. So, and I personally did 2 of those very existential rounds. The company has been through issues also later on. But I'm really also happy to see that the company also still today, they use the same textbook.
Right.
But of course, along the way, improvements need to be made to that textbook, and this is an area where you can always be better, so you can always see, what are the latest things, what you can do differently, and also you as a professional. I mean, it from your area, you coach leaders, you help them develop their leadership skills, that also the way leaders act and how they run the companies, that can change. Absolutely. That can be improved. Also the way you facilitate their growth, also that can change. Also, that is quite an exciting thing.
It is interesting.
We did one thing just 2 years back, and then we just realized that 2 years onwards, things can be done differently,
Absolutely, evolution of the company. I think it's so important that leaders are there, especially at the highest levels, helping to mentor and grow the rest of the team. I always get a little worried when I hear about an organization and they're like, oh, the leadership training, it's being arranged by HR. I'm like, look, I kind of see what you mean in a procedural process, but I want to know, like, is that training coming from our leadership, or are you just putting on a course? Like, I want to see, and our leaders are there to mentor. That is your job, to look up and out and then to mentor our people. And I'd love to see when management, the highest levels of management, are taking that interest, wanting to devote. That's your job, to grow and mentor and support the team around you. And you haven't just said, I don't know, I'm the CFO, I only handle the numbers and mentoring my team, I palmed off to HR. Know that they're very much interested in it. So, okay, you're getting a front seat to all of this crisis that's happening. You are head of communications. And so I guess that's putting you've got to manage the public face as well. You've got to manage the team,
internal,
and then you've got internal and
external
external
issues,
right?
And external and political,
and political because it's a national airline, right?
And political and financial, because sometimes it involves bailout money or there are so many aspects. You don't do it alone. You have your entire team. But here's the thing. I mean, you started a big topic. Who is the driver of change? Who is the driver of that leadership? Is it HR, or is it the CEO, or is it the shareholder? So, well, I think everybody has to play a role.
Okay.
And I think it's the situation you described is so much better when the HR is putting the leadership or coaching training in front of the in front of the board. It's so much better than doing nothing at all.
Okay, true.
And actually we see that a lot also in the emergency management, in the resilience programs. It is so easy to be complacent. And it's not about, we are not talking about those other people. I mean, I find it very often about myself that oh my God, I can do this stuff. I'm already good at it. And if that complacency, sets in, I know already that it's really high time for me to do a recurrent training or the refresh training, because the moment you think you are really good at something, that's the moment where your how do you call it, like lateral
the
vision
blinders, the horse has the blinders on, something.
You are really becoming blind. Better be humble, say okay. And actually there is a tool for that. What you can do. Actually, when we develop, for example, the emergency management or the crisis programs, the first thing I do personally, we create a schedule for refresh trainings.
Okay.
We define who needs a refresh when. And actually, one of the things is actually to discipline myself. Basically to say, yes, Janis, you might be good at it. You might be good at leadership, but hey, make sure you get a refresh every 6 months or every 12 months. It's like a good pilot. I have back in the day, I used to have a pilot's license.
Okay.
And that's a normal thing. You do a refresh.
So you're sort of tying the training into the crisis management, because often I can find that training, it's tough to get a training budget in many big organizations. Tough to allocate. Oh, okay, yes, we're supposed to allocate money. But somehow it feels more important when we tie it to crisis management. Hey, we've got to have a crisis management plan. We've got to deal with the unexpected. To enable that, we need to also have a training plan.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Without a training plan, and if you just do you do your paper, you do your emergency response plan, So, or today they call it resilience plan, or they call it the crisis manual. Regardless of the name, you have to have some flesh on the bones, and that flesh is training, and that flesh is culture. So culture change, so the mentality. So when you get like you said, plan might be useless, but the planning, the process, things involved around it, the awareness of the need for emergency management, the lookout for potential risks out there, that is something that is really like making this whole process tick. Yeah.
When you encountered these crises at airBaltic, and I don't mean to speak bad of it, I'm not trying to, but was there already processes in place, or you had to there wasn't much, you had to, like many organizations, you had to deal with it at the time, and then you went, oh wait, we need to systematize this, we need to make that. At first, were there processes in place, or not good enough, or something like that?
Normally, industries like airlines, like chemical manufacturers, oil industry, and shipping, they have reasonable, good processes or excellent processes. Why? Because they are required by the law. So this is heavily regulated. Sometimes they can be better. No process is complete. Life is not perfect, but important is like how you follow it, how you improve it, how you live it, and what I'm happy to see that also this example set by the industries I mentioned is like this is increasingly adopted also by other industries, because they just realize, hey, we need that, we need to like what I started in the transportation industry, but then the retail industry realized, okay, we need that now. Now the healthcare realized that we need a brush up, like improvement in the processes because of the COVID. And now we say, okay, the military also feel like, oh, why don't we learn from the civilian world? And I get now a lot of invites from those think tanks that are very close to NATO or the military themselves, where they say, hey, Janis, I mean, okay, it's been interesting what you've seen in many other industries. What can we, the military, learn from those other industries? Although we are good, what are the angles we haven't covered, And even what museums, what churches, what libraries learn from the crisis management, and it's a huge area that hasn't been tapped into yet. Because we see from this recent crises that, even the museums, they have like the valuable items that are part of national identity, national heritage. They need to be taken care of. And okay, they are valuables in themselves, but also the process of taking care of your national heritage items can be very healing for people who go through trauma. So you see, this is a double process. So you protect your heritage, but the process of protecting your heritage is a healing process for people who have just been through trauma, like air raids, like internal displacement, so on and so forth, or loss of a
So something like that might be, if, for example, an aggressor nation were to launch an attack, we need a procedure to ensure that, or bombs start falling overhead, we need a procedure to ensure that we are safeguarding the national treasures, invaluable national treasures.
Exactly. The treasures in themselves. And then also, like, it sounds very easy, but then, that's a huge operation. If you just think that, for example, within just 14 days, you have to secure all the stained glass in the churches in Tallinn, yes? Or you have to secure all the monuments, and then, then you start thinking, how many man-hours we need, how many volunteers we need, how to run that huge operation, because it is very easy to have a huge crowd of 1,000 people. But if it is not organized, it is a mob.
Right.
If it is organized, it is an organization. It is an army. It's an entire battalion of volunteers. But the huge difference is that what is the thinking put into the management, or what is the preparation done before those 1,000 volunteers come along? So that is a long process. It can take up to 2-3 years to start running, because you need smart managers of that process. You need coordinators. You need a channel. You need. Oh, sorry.
Bring it a bit closer again. No, you're good. No, it's fine. It's not so precious. It's all right.
Yes. So you need trained people. You need dedicated people. You need a communications channel. You need resources to you need to feed those 1,000 people, or you need to shelter them, or you need to sleep them somewhere. So it's a very exciting process. And you just think, oh, we are talking just some boring museums or libraries. They're not boring at all. They're
very important things.
Very interesting.
I think we're getting to some good stuff now. We're really digging into what is not just using the word crisis, but what are the things we're planning for. But before we dig into that, you said that there are some industries that are highly regulated: airlines, dangerous industries, chemicals, stuff like that. So I can imagine, I don't know, nothing as an airline, if there's a incident and there's a crash, let's say, I don't know. There's something with the planes that goes wrong and people are put into a safety problem. Maybe even if the terrorists come, okay, that's to do with that. But is the airline industry regulated in the way of like, oh, we just have a bad business model and we didn't sell enough tickets this year? Like, is that angle? Because wasn't that a little bit also cash flow problems for airBaltic? It's not like the terrorists came, it was cash flow problems. It was, we don't have a great business model. Is that side of those industries regulated? Or no doubt you should be thinking about that, though.
No, just let's not get into that one.
Okay, all right. Because
the industry, like commercial airlines, started 110 years back. Exactly now, this year it's 110 years old, since 1914, when the first commercial flights took off in Florida, in I think it was Tampa Bay. And since that time, for 110 years, the airlines have been very good at one thing: destroying capital. So we take it as given, but then let's go more into the operations side.
That's fine. Yeah. And look, we're sitting here in the Republic of Estonia. We don't even have a national airline. We can't even pull that together. So, and absolutely, I'm not here to dig up the dregs. It's more just sort of like what's regulated, what's not. And I guess leading on to my next topic is how then, as it through an organization, do we identify the crises we should be planning for? And the extension all the way down the line is going to be, oh, you did so much crisis planning with Maxima, this and that. Did you plan for a pandemic? There's so many things. So let's go through all of that.
All right. Yeah.
If I have any organization, museum, I don't know, car sales company, bakery,
school,
actually, how do I even make an audit to know of the things that I should be planning for?
One thing that is really lovely about crisis is that, there are different scenarios that can play out. You can have a good feel about these scenarios that will play out by having a robust risk assessment system. So that's the starting point. You have a risk assessment system, then you know what is about, what is likely to happen. What are the probabilities? And you can actually, you can have a numerical value to those probabilities. But the other beautiful thing is that whatever the scenario plays out, 80% of the response to crisis is the same or very similar.
Okay.
Yeah? So what you basically, where most organizations fail is exactly at the leadership level or at the shareholder level. So basically they fail in the first step. They actually failed before the first step. So basically they decide to not go into this. They say like, oh, nothing really bad happens to us. There are no pandemics happening. There are no wars in Europe. There are no aircraft flying into high buildings. So we don't need to prepare for these eventualities.
So if I just do a whole bunch of different scenarios and planning, statistically, if something totally left field happens, I'll be much better off because at least I did some form of planning for other things, and I can pull bits, or I already know a little bit of how we're going to organize 1,000 people for something,
or even 10 people to run those processes to make sure that these 1,000 people are taken good care of, you know. So basically, that's what I'm saying, that 80% of your response is very similar because you have an emergency, and if you have detailed like 5 to 10 scenarios, you will be so much better off than those guys who have done nothing about it and who have thought like, oh, you know, bad things really never happen to us. You know, it's I think it's a due process. It's a sort of so to say that good managers, good leaders should take care of, and you should not overcompensate for something. You know, if there is a pandemic, then you should start preparing for pandemics only. You know, that's another very typical mistake, that people experience something unusual and then they overcompensate by preparing for only that one thing. You know, but it's a smart thing to basically, actually, my so to say religion is to do everything dual purpose. If it's good for your emergency, that may be also good for your daily operation, you know. If you need to prepare that's what we did in the retail store in Maxima. So we started training people to run unusual circumstances, you know, to respond to unusual situations, actually to start forecasting situations, to start mitigating the risks, and then start responding. And then we realized at one point, they said like, okay, we had a daily operation happening, and then somebody said like, why don't we activate our, you know, emergency response organization? Because we have, you know, this situation is getting out of hand. And then we said, okay, let's practice it. So, and it was very good for the training purposes, and we were doing something like pretty, like we would say, simple thing, but that served the purpose. We could be better prepared for like our daily issues, you know. You shouldn't call a crisis team for like every second day. That's also true. You know, you shouldn't devalue that concept as well.
But I see the point that, okay, crisis planning, if I understand, is a bit about developing standard operating procedures. We need to have a standard operating procedure for what happens where we think this thing, that thing, or that thing could happen. And we're going to develop a standard procedure for each of those scenarios. But what I'm hearing from you is just the fact that my team is now learning how to make a standard procedure for that, and that. The team is going, oh, standard procedures?
Yes.
These are great things. I really like. Wow. Hey, guys, why don't we make a standard procedure for the thing we do every day? Wouldn't that make a lot of sense? Oh, yeah, it makes great. Yeah. And it's getting this culture of, because that's what we want. We want to make standard procedures for as much as possible so that we're taking the, I don't know, regular. In my mind, when I'm running my small organization, if we do something twice, I'm like, we should be writing this down.
Exactly.
It gets me. Like, why am I inventing this? Right. Why am I inventing this twice? I've already had this thought process of thinking this up once.
Yeah. And then next thing, you will take it to the next level, because you say, okay, we've been running these things twice. Then we will say like, how about tweaking this a little bit and just like do a little bit of a brain exercise and say like, what if we have something really unexpected in this area that we had a procedure for, and we did this twice, and then let's just think of something very unusual happening, and let's write the procedure for something very unusual, or the so-called unknown unknowns. Sure. But then it gets you in the mood, and then you start realizing that, you know, hey, okay, this thing falling out of the sky, and and our team responding to it is very similar to those two things that you just wrote down, but with a little tweak. And then you get into that culture, and then you start thinking, okay, so then you start looking at things from the so-called business continuity perspective. And then I think you are on the right track. I mean, that's a beautiful thing of accepting that change happens, accepting that you should formalize change. You should really write those procedures down and then review them once a year, say, and then also make some of the old procedures also redundant, say, like, cleaning the house.
And it's normal. It's normalized
Yes.
that happens. When an organization is trying to introduce any sort of procedure, let's say a day-to-day one or even a crisis management one, but introduce a procedure, it can be difficult to know where to begin. So as a leadership, I might be the leader. I'm like, this is what we do. And then I hand it down to the frontline staff and they go, they'll probably hate it because it's not exactly what they do. I've got the wrong impression of it. On the other hand, maybe the frontline need a little tightening up. So I can't quite. So there's this balance, these competing ideas that as leadership, I don't want to just write a thing and hand it down like Moses handing down the tablets. It has to live and evolve. And do you have some experiences of creating these procedures from scratch? Do you talk to the frontline workers? Do you talk to management? Or, of course, you're talking to everyone at once?
Well, difficult question. Where to start?
Yeah.
Actually, typically, real life, reality is something bad happens.
Okay.
And then you start. I mean, in my experience, I get a phone call when unfortunately some of the colleagues have perished or some of the customers have been killed by that organization, through the way they do the business, and also we can talk about ideal world, but the real world is like pretty pragmatic, and also, I mean, that's the nature of business. You do something when you're required to do that thing. Otherwise, you save resource and channel that resource into profit. That's the essence of business.
Natural way of doing it.
I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I want to do as little as necessarily possible, and that's okay. And for that, and those leaders who also we are trained to deliver profits, deliver return on investment, return on capital, and it's okay to be, scarce about, extra costs. So that's why I'm a big fan of this dual purpose thing. If I'm doing something, and if that something helps my resilience and emergency management, and at the same time, if that helps to make my business better, then go ahead for it. And also the other thing is what is also very helpful, what I see with my colleagues, who have been, in the management boards and who are, running large corporations. It's very good to sometimes just sit back and reflect and think it's okay to be selfish, it's okay to protect yourself a little bit, because there are always two people, who will lose their job coming out of the crisis,
So who's that?
This is the CEO,
Okay.
If he runs the crisis poorly, he's the CEO, and that the board member responsible for that crisis area. And maybe one or the other, or some and few more people along the way. But the worst thing is those people who are accountable for the crisis. The top people responsible for the organization in the middle of the crisis. They actually face a dead end in their career. So if this thinking about crisis maybe 20, 30 years back was that, oh my God, you have to take care about the crisis because the organization might not survive. It is you, the leader. You are not to survive. The organization will survive. I've seen many organizations in very difficult crisis. and they still continue. They thrive. There are few organizations that fold wings or that cease to exist because of the crisis. But it is exactly the leaders, those people who were exactly responsible for making that decision to start developing their resilience process. Those people will no longer have their careers. And I remember my colleagues who were in those positions. They still, like, at best, they work in this far away office, somewhere in the basement. They still, like, at best they are like on how do you call it, a subsistence salary or something. Small salary, doing something, but they can never really have their career developed.
And that's a reputation issue you're talking about.
Not only,
now.
I mean,
or
reputation, trauma, nervous breakdown, you name it. But there is a bright side, There is that's the sad side, that's the difficult side, but there is also the bright side to it. There are people who were never shying away from the crisis, and who basically skyrocketed in their career, who were for who that was a major breakthrough or an excellent training, an excellent, it's a building of their own personality brand. So like tomorrow I have one person from Jens Stoltenberg team telling how they were dealing with the crisis in Oslo bombings in Utoya. So some of my colleagues, unfortunately the room is too small to make it a public event, but tomorrow in Estonian, actually in Estonian Business School, we have this event, and my MBA students will have a chance to listen, to the first-hand experiences, how to run an actual crisis, and actually how the leader who was taking Norway through that crisis, how he basically became a global superstar in political circles, and he was actually a superstar in running NATO as an alliance. So I think there's many wonderful examples like that.
You've given me a lot to unpack there. That was so interesting, full of different angles and examples. So I'm going to try and pick through. I don't want to be negative, not so much to focus on the negative, but just look at the different ways that a leader can deal with crisis. So on the more negative side, there were two outcomes. One is that a person can't, let's say as a leader, they don't rise to the challenge, don't deal with the situation very well, and then they suffer, let's say, reputational loss in the industry, and no one wants to hire them. They get a bad because they didn't deal with that. Maybe they didn't take accountability. Maybe they didn't put the right procedures in place. They put blame onto others, and we all know. Then there are other people that, I don't know, for better or for worse, they're suffering trauma. And so they've gone through such a difficult thing. Maybe they were genuinely putting in their best. Maybe they were genuinely trying, but they go through a trauma situation from that accident, and that's leaving them with post-traumatic, whatever the mental issues that might come, and that stops their career in some ways. So I was just separating them out because first one's like a bad leader, right? Yeah. And the second one is a person who has dealt with a very difficult situation and having mental health problems from it.
I think that's a very interesting angle. I'm inclined to actually to disagree to the bad leadership thing. I don't think there are bad leaders. I mean, there is probably, either not really a supporting culture in an organization to say like, hey, why don't we, try this thing out, why don't we change a little bit or tweak a little bit some of our processes, tweak our culture a little bit, It is, I think, sometimes very easy to blame the leaders. Say like, okay, you didn't do that. But then the question is like, how did we support the leader? Did we come up with this issue, Because sometimes, also there are things, or for example, the conference we were together in a few weeks back, you can blame the leaders for not having enough resources allocated for cybersecurity. Yeah, okay. But then you can always ask, okay, where were the professionals? Did they bring it up? Did the shareholders support that mentality? So I think that for a good reason, organizations are called organizations. That means a group of people where everyone can contribute. So, and also those situations. Again, I want to talk about the organizations again. Also for the second category you mentioned, the category where you say post-traumatic stress, burnout, nervous breakdown. So it is again, we have an organization, and if we have an organization, then we have basically, if we have thought through the crisis management, then we have thought through of the post-event measures and actually taking care of our people.
It's one of those. Okay, it's one of the procedures.
It's one of the things where you can say, well, let's not turn a blind eye to these realities. We will have PTSD. We will have nervous breakdowns. We will have people burned out. Or, for God's sake, we haven't taken care of scheduling, rostering people. How can we expect a CEO to be, up and running after 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours if there's no proper rostering? If there is, like one of the most typical things that I encounter, also in fantastic organizations in terms of crisis management, there are not enough substitutes for the CEO, not enough substitutes for a good, good operations manager who is running the crisis as separate thing from the daily operations. Yes, and there are no substitutes sometimes. So just if you have it practiced, if you have good drills, you have good trainings and smart people to put together these trainings, then you will realize it after the first 12 hours that, hey, my leader is somehow not doing well. Oh, he wants to he needs to sleep. Okay. So, and then you start building on it. And then these things sound so simple, actually, so self-evident. But without a proper mentality, without a proper culture, without proper drills, you simply just don't find out.
So do I almost have, when I'm thinking about that first category of the leader who doesn't deal with it well, is that almost, I'm thinking like a comical stereotype of the incompetent leader who can't handle it. But if you're leading an international company, you're probably not that incompetent to begin with. Like there's a reason why you got there. Like I'm trying to think of, is there a case, is there a case, here's the question for you then, where the leadership's not my fault, it was some other, I don't know, the government's fault, the other department's fault, not my fault, and they cause way more problems. Now, where opposite would be a good leader who says, I take responsibility, here's what I'm going to do to fix it, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, Is there examples of this leader who tries to avoid blame, does a Donald Trump, no, it was everybody else, like maybe I've got too much Donald Trump news in my head, and I think that's how other people work and not just this one, guy, crazy guy, right?
So yes, the question basically is like leaders in denial, of a situation, as opposed to,
or not humble enough, maybe,
or not humble enough. I think they're. I mean, that's a very human reaction to a shock situation, and I think we see that, more often than we would wish to. I mean, that's because it's a human reaction. I mean, and here's the thing, here's the secret. These big leaders in global corporations, at the end of the day, they are people, and I mean, they also make mistakes. They also have their emotions. They also have their denial, and I myself also, as being in the board positions, I've been also in denial sometimes. I've been through emotions. And I have made mistakes. I still make mistakes. But the good thing is, like, if you have a system to correct for your mistakes, then you are better off. And basically, yes, and this early preparation is a good tool to to cut some of these risks out and cut some of these threats and hazards out and make sure that actually you don't arrive at an emergency. So you have a good, robust risk assessment, risk management procedure. Then if you run into an emergency, then basically you know what to do, and then you have the right leaders and well-trained leaders. Basically, you don't have training for emergencies, for crisis. Don't expect your leaders to be good at it. Simple as that. You are former combat training, If you haven't done your training, you can't expect people to be good at what they're supposed to do. And same about crisis and resilience.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Let's assume that our leaders are not comically stupid and not comically have massive egos and unhumble and all this stuff, but they're competent, but they've still made a mistake. As ultimately as the leader in the organization, it's on you. It comes down to you, and maybe they haven't done the training. It happened on their watch, maybe another term to put it. And now it's one thing that the leader is okay, but then there's also the court of public opinion and the image of the company that might say, leaders got to go. Okay, leadership needs to change because this crisis happened, and the public opinion, or however that might be, I don't know if that's even maybe shareholders, I'm not sure if that applies here, says leaders got to go. Are there examples where the leader has that crisis, they've got a very negative opinion because this really bad thing just happened on their watch, and rather than just running away, they're like, I'm going to take responsibility for this. Yes, I see the problems that we made. Here's how we're getting through the next 60 days. Here's what we're doing in the next 6 months, and doesn't resign, not because they're arrogant and they say F you, because they say, I see what we did and I'm going to get us through this. Are there some examples of great leadership examples like this?
I think there are plenty of those as well. I mean, Tony Fernandez from AirAsia they have sorted things out with some of their accidents in a very elegant way, or same, I mentioned Jens Stoltenberg in Oslo bombings, and they had learnings from those, and there were errors, or they were, so to say, some things were happening below their radars, and many leaders, we see them like on a daily basis, but I mean, we have our human nature tends to focus on these bad examples, where there's a lot of blood and suffering and things like that. But I see a lot of very good examples around that we can learn from, and it is very important to do it in a systematic way. You have within your organization, there is a person with a name and surname and a phone number who is really accountable for keeping an eye on those and actually monitoring these good lessons and bad lessons, and then basically updating the risk management procedures accordingly. So and making sure that also the leaders get relevant training for situation Alpha or situation Bravo, So.
Okay.
So it's quite an exciting thing actually to learn from this. I have myself a good collection of things that I keep an eye on and say okay, this was well done or poorly handled.
If you mean other companies or situations,
or situations,
right? Okay.
Politicians give plenty of excellent examples how they handle things. And you don't need to look far for that. You can just look around and always, if you see something happening, something that catches the public's eye, you can always you can relate to that. They say, what would I do if that would happen to my small company, or my big company, or my political party, or my shipping line, or my battalion, any organization. Fits.
All right. I think that's a nice point for us to take a turn here. So we're trying to identify what are the possible crises that could happen in our organization, and from what I've heard from you, it doesn't matter that I don't necessarily account for every single little thing that could happen.
Exactly.
Because the point, if I just do a bunch of them, it's the process of planning. It's the planning rather than plan that's important. And when the unknown happens, because I've already thought through a whole bunch of stuff. It's already got me on the way. We're already in the mode of making procedures. We're already in the mode that, okay, we're in this, even though it's now a completely different thing. And then we're training our teams to work on this. Now, you spoke about different sorts of organizations, but as I understand, you are working with a new NGO. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're working more at a home level, more at a domestic level, or to help people prepare for these crises. Tell us about this.
Yes, we started a new organization with Estonians participating, and with the president of Latvia and a few other very prominent people who are experienced in crisis. Basically say, hey, we come together and we make sure that those learnings from different crises are shared across the Nordic region, not just because I mean, if you just think, and here's the thing, I don't want to offend anyone. We are small countries here. We're not terribly huge, and these terrible crises or this experience from crisis, is not ubiquitous. It's not all over the place. We have few crises here and there, but then these learnings sometimes somehow dissipate. They perish and unless they are shared. I think it's a good platform, to come together and say okay, here's the best practice in handling a cyber attack. Here's the best practice in managing volunteers around museums who are looking after cultural heritage. Or, here's the best practice how to pack your survival bag, And then basically we said, okay, we start this NGO to help primarily, communities, and help also organizations, primarily entrepreneurs, businesses, in doing this in the most cost-effective way, and that can happen only through synergies and sharing, and sometimes that can happen also. Going back to your question, how do you learn these things? How do you structure these things? Actually, sometimes you really need somebody very smart but very lazy to say okay, we will structure this process in the most effective way. Sure. Okay, so I trust we have very smart people. I don't know if we are lazy enough to do it in the most efficient way, but definitely we can help with experience and say okay, here's the thing, how we can what, for example, Organization Alpha or Organization Bravo or Charlie has to do to structure their resilience process, or what trainings do I need? Where do I start? If I even don't have a risk manager to tell me what I need as a leader, because I listened to Louis' program and heard okay, my career might be in dead end. Where do I go? Who can help me? Or Janis told me it takes 2 years to get prepared, but I run into a crisis in 2 weeks. Where do I get a reliable, reasonable mentor that can help me through this crisis? And then I use this crisis as a starting point to get my procedures, reworked, So how do I get an advisor and a coach? Where do I get my training programs? Where do I get my first emergency response plan? Should I really think about my risk management procedure at all, or should I still, ignore it, eyes closed,
So the NGO is called CIREN, Civilian Resilience Nordic. We're sharing these lessons across our countries here in the North. And from what I'm hearing, it's really, it sounds like at a national level, a local level, community level. You talked about museums, for small businesses. And what I'm hearing is that these are groups that don't have the money to pay for a crisis manager, you say. Now, it's one thing, maybe Maxima billion euros. Okay, we can set aside some money for these things, but the church, this small entrepreneur, we don't have the resources to find a person, make these learnings. So you're kind of a source where they can go to get some of this information. Is that how do we even engage with CIREN?
Oh, absolutely. For example, the National Library of Latvia is a cultural organization, but the CEO is a founder of it, and basically they have people who are very dedicated and come over and say like, yeah, we want to learn from other experts. And actually, if you are an expert, you can, as a private individual, you can become a member and engage in one of the learning circles. And it's actually very similar to going to the gym. Basically you pay your membership fee, but you still have to do your exercise, and you can get some good guidance. Or similar to, for example, an organization in corporate governance like the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. Yes, if you are a board member, you have to know how proper corporate governance works. So you go and take one of the courses, and then you become a member, and then start following best practices. It's exactly the same model. How an NGO works in this area, where it's actually it's knowledge based, volunteer based. But of course, when it comes to larger, like for example, certification programs, if you want to certify your organization that you are top-notch standard, then of course that's a separate project. And then of course the big Maximas and the big organizations of this world, they will have a separate arrangement for that. But then you will also have a good feeling that when doing, for example, your certification program, this will help communities again to build their resilience. So you pay for your certification as a big corporate, but then somebody in the museum will be enabled to take good care of the heritage. Or, for example, in an archive or in a library, they will be, better enabled, better equipped with better tools to look after these 100-year-old books, and so on. That's how, so to say, a community synergy works.
Interesting. And it's help that I never imagined could be out there. And now that you explain it to me, it's absolutely we need our business. Okay, if I run one of the businesses I run, it's a stand-up comedy production agency. We run live stand-up comedy shows. But you know what? I got 100 people packed into a small, tight room. Okay, who knows what could happen, right? Something happens.
Exactly.
We need a procedure. Okay, and I'm just all sorts of business.
And they are your customers.
Yep, they're my customers.
And they are paying customers, and they expect you to take care of their well-being and security. And I mean, and the thinking that we have in the industry is that it's not the question if a crisis happens. The question is when it happens, and then you know exactly what you do. And then there's the other thing. You have your 100 people, and there is something happening, and simple mundane things like food allergies, and then you cannot undo that thing. You cannot wind back time. That the bad thing has happened. The only thing you can do is respond in a very responsible way. With the main focus on people, on your customer or your employees who will see you act in this situation. So yes, or if you with your skills, if you decide also as a production agency, okay, I want to join a community initiative like CIREN, they say oh, I have skills, I know how to mobilize people, to change their mindset, go into volunteering, I can inspire people. It's basically, what you do is very critical. I was asked the same question yesterday by one of the weird TV, how do you call it? The faces, TV faces.
Okay.
What's the English for this proper way? One of the TV anchors. Yes.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the TV anchors. She was asking Janis, how can I get involved? They say, well, you are a very active person, opinion leader. You can tell people to start, thinking, changing their mindset, changing your attitudes towards resilience and community resilience. And then she was like, oh yeah, actually, yes, it's very relevant for me. All of a sudden, if we just start thinking about it, it becomes very relevant. So, and a thing where everyone can basically chip in.
Sure. How can we need to make a bunch of procedures to deal with things that we don't know? Some we can guess might happen. Who knows what else? If we've got a bunch of procedures, this can help us in a crisis because we've already thought it through. We've already worked through some of the steps. We're not making it up as we go. And maybe I've got some particular skills in some area that I can contribute to other organizations. Like the news anchor is very good at getting the word out or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I could come. I know how to communicate to large groups of people. Let me write down some information that I know about herding 100 people from there to there. Some skills that I've, so in case you ever have to yell at 100 people to get from there to there, here's how you might go about it.
Or you might train another 10 people in a special dedicated, group. And then they can actually herd not 100 people, but then they will coordinate 10 groups of 100 people, and there is a multiplier effect immediately. And that's, I think, the beauty of it when you just start, look at the small detail of it. So, it's the topic is overall quite, related, to depressing angles of life, but I think the good thing is that there is a lot of there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, especially for those people who are prepared for it.
There is. I mean, yes, it's by definition, I guess, something bad is happening, so there's crisis. But there's such an enlightening thing. It's to say we've planned to help one another. Even that we've had that thought, hey, as a community, we've made that even is a relationship building. That is some light even right there. I've thought about you. I've thought about how we're going to deal with if something happens overnight or something like that. That's, I don't know, building. That's nice. That's a nice thought in itself.
Absolutely.
Dearie me. Janis, we've hit the hour mark, so we might head off there. So this has been a nice discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your interest and thanks for really making people aware of it. This is very, very important. I mean, that people really start thinking and your interviews make it happen. So another thing, maybe your next training session for the next 10 people on how to run these, how to inspire people, and how to make video interviews and help guide people, give them the correct advice and helpful advice. So
I love it. You've got great enthusiasm. Janis, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this. Man. Thank you.